Hey folks, before we get to the episode, I want to invite you to this month's International Directors Meetup, our monthly gathering of directors and theater makers from around the world. It's a space to share experiences, trade advice, and find support in what can often be a pretty isolating role. You can come and go as you need, drop in late, leave early, whatever fits your schedule. It's simply a chance to set aside time each month to sit alongside others who understand the work. For dates, times, and details, head to boardofdirectors.world and pull up a chair at the table. Join the board. There are some artists you meet at a moment when they're still forming, and even then, you can see exactly where they're headed. Mikhael Tara Garver has always been that for me. We met at Columbia, and from the very beginning, her instincts were different. I remember seeing her work in Chicago before she moved to New York and realizing that she wasn't just making theater, she was reimagining the relationship between audience and story. Not asking people to sit and watch, but inviting them to step inside, to participate, to complete the experience. Since then, her path has only deepened. From her early work with Punch Drunk to her leadership across immersive and experiential storytelling to working at the highest levels with Disney. She's been at the forefront of a form that's defining itself, pushing beyond theater into design, technology, and cultural experience. What I love about this conversation is that it doesn't just sit in the what of immersive work. It really gets into the why. We talk about audience as collaborator, about relational dramaturgy, about how you design not just a story, but a system of participation. And we talk about leadership, what it means to hold space, to build teams, and to navigate an industry that's still catching up to the work. She's a dear friend, someone I trust deeply, and someone whose thinking continues to shape how I understand audience and experience. This is my conversation with Mikhael Tara Garver. So, Mikhael, I remember seeing your orange lemon egg canary with your company Uma in Chicago before you moved to New York.
Wait, did I know this?
I came up for like a weekend. I stayed on your couch. It was a very brief, I came in see a couple of shows.
We'll talk about why these are things I don't remember because I have a memory. We could talk about why I have a massive memory block. But I was just like, you just said that, and I truly, truly don't remember.
But it was 2010 before we both started. I think it was the summer before you moved to New York, because it was the last show that you did with Uma, I think.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Well, and it was, because, right, we had announced that that was a whole thing, right? We had announced, or I had come to the company. It's like one of my favorite moments in my career, like the gift I was given from Uma, from my theater company. But yeah, I had gone to them because I had gotten into Columbia after doing a silly audition with you.
Yeah.
You and I were partners.
We were.
And I will never, ever forget the man who had the numbers written all over his body. I don't know who that was. I don't remember who it was. But I remember you and I being at Shapiro for the audition for Columbia and me truly being like, there's no way I'm getting in here. All these people are like so arty and I am not. And I just like stories. So like they all are like quoting like all these people they've read. I've just been running a theater company in Chicago. Like, I don't know what's what. And I remember us and then you were my partner and like we were both like humans. And everyone else, in my opinion, was like very creative, arty, like a thing that I just didn't. I was like, there is just no world. There's no world where I'm getting in. And I had a whole life in Chicago. So I was like, oh, okay. I did this thing. I got in and I hadn't even planned to audition. Like it was a whole weird story. I hadn't planned to apply. And then that weekend that happened. And then Anne said to me, well, you have a career in Chicago, but, you could give yourself this gift of just being a creative. And I was like, can I curse on this?
Yeah, of course you can.
I was like, fuck you, Anne, which is what she always wants us to say to her.
Yeah, right.
Right? I don't actually mean that to her, but like, Because I think of that moment and I realized I hadn't, it's a good reminder always of like, what are the gifts you're giving to your creative self when you're a creative producer, when you produce also. Um, and then there was a guy who, for someone else's scene, covered his body in numbers with permanent marker. And I heard him from upstairs, from the basement. You and I are sitting with each other. And he goes, wait,
It's permanent?
permanent? Wait, it's permanent? And I was like, oh no. Like, this is horrible.
Yeah. And he didn't get in.
He did not get in. Which is horrible. And if he listens to this, like, I'm sorry. Like, you sacrificed so much. And I'm sorry for that. But, we all sacrifice certain things.
I think it's wild that you thought you had no chance.
Well, I had no, but Adam, we can talk about this in the journey of this. Like,
Yeah.
I think I literally said to one of my teammates recently, I was like, I think just this year I realized I'm a creative.
It's
Just this
crazy.
year.
That is insane.
Like, deeply realized it. Like, deeply in my bones. Because I'd always been also a person who gets shit done. And my thinking of that in the world of the incredible artists that I'd been around was like, there was a permission I felt like they had, that they weren't, not to say not all of it, but like it didn't feel like the getting it done was where they drove. They drove to, like, their work, they worked hard. That wasn't that, but like getting right into it because I know you, like I valued my own work ethic. And I thought that my creativity was a thing I got to do because of my work ethic. And it's taken me a long time to realize that I get to do what I get to do because of my creativity.
Yeah.
And my leadership, right?
Yeah.
But that's a daily thing I have to remind myself of.
I mean, thank you for saying that, because I mean, I have never not thought of you as a creative. From the moment I met you, I thought to myself, when we became partners, I thought, thank God I've got somebody good, because I'm sure the audition is going to change come, in the next couple of years. So I don't think we can, it's a problem to say what happens, but like the directors direct the other directors in pieces, and I got you to direct me.
Yeah, my worst nightmare.
Because it is simultaneously your competition and also the person that can help you get in.
Well, and also it is the best, it's actually the smartest audition for what the program ends up being, because, it's such a testament, that program. There are many challenges that I feel looking back, but like, if anything, the thing that you have to do that we did, and I also came from a world of having built an ensemble, and I remember being adamant, like, the 6 of us, we're going to have to work together. And if we don't figure out how, we will not survive this. And I probably, because of who I am, erred too far in that direction, right? Like, emphasize that too much for myself, right? I was so, but I do think that like it meant that we got to do a lot of great things together. We went to Paris.
We did.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think there's just that audition, as much as it's weird, like, I'm grateful it was you.
Yeah, same.
So grateful. And also, like, I kid you not, 100% left that audition, called my family, and I was like, well, this was a cool experiment. Like, I'm not going to get in. And then got a phone call like beginning of that next week. And I was like,
I thought for sure. I knew you were going to get in. And I thought, I'm lucky I got to work with her. I'm not going to get in. And I was waitlisted, and I didn't find out until very, very late that summer. And it was like, fantastic. Great. This is amazing. And then, of course, when I found out that you had gotten in, I was like, well, of course, that makes total sense.
It feels like, because it is 1 million years ago.
That's 1 million years ago. I know. I'm sure the people who are listening to the podcast love hearing stories.
Yeah, I'm sure the podcast,
Columbia
this
from
is
15
now
years ago.
Suddenly we've made your podcast into a like Columbia. Yeah, anyway, let's
Columbia,
move on.
call me, set it up. I'd like to get rid of some of the student loan debt.
Exactly. Yeah. You want debt forever? Come to Columbia.
God.
Anyway, we've moved on since then. But yeah, no, I do think it was also a turning point for me, right? Like I to this day, I think I think that I like to have a good balance of like what we do is important and also what we do is one piece of many things. And I think that one of my challenges inside grad school is like for it to work, you kind of, a lot of people like it becomes their whole universe. And I really struggled with that. I got really struggled with it. But I also think it was a good learning for me of like, well, what if this is the only thing you have to do is create things? And I tried to avoid that as much as possible. Like, you know, tried to make it harder over and over
Why?
again
What
until
do you
it,
think? Where's
I
that?
mean,
Where's
it's the
that?
same, I think that like the giving of the gift to myself, I spent a lot of time needing it to prove to myself that it was worth it. And I spent a lot I think this is a thing that I work on still today of like I take these huge leaps. I'm not a person who doesn't take huge leaps. I've
Uh-uh.
taken a lot of huge leaps.
Yeah.
But when I do, I then kind of make myself have to earn it. And I'm just learning more and more as I get into my older middle age that like all that energy is so no, it doesn't help anyone. It's not helping anyone. And it was just not helping anyone. Like all the guilt, all those things, all the things, the guilt and the shame that Brian Kulick taught us about and
Oh,
the
yeah.
being different and all that stuff, right? Like it doesn't do good for anyone. And I think that has a lot to do with kind of growing up in a household in which I'm the eldest on both sides, and this sense of kind of responsibility was always really important to me, and a responsibility to the people around me, a responsibility to my family, a responsibility to the opportunities I'm given. And that was how I would lead that's how I kind of drove into the world. It was like, this is all a responsibility, as opposed to sometimes a gift is a gift. And that over indexing on responsibility is what makes sometimes really great directors and really great leaders, but it can also go so far that you're not creating space for other people to step in. And so I think I've been in a process of learning that, which again, for your podcast audience, I hope that this is what they wanted to listen to. Just me jumping in on the
This is
psychology
perfect.
of
No, this is
leadership. I think it's a
absolutely.
huge psychology of leadership, right? I
Yeah.
think there's an art in leadership. And as a director, when I'm directing, when I'm creating, I don't really call what I do directing anymore, but whatever I'm doing, when I'm making the thing that I'm making, I am constantly creating structures in which I understand I'm handing other people their own responsibility. I'm creating situations in which they can stand there and be themselves, both the audience and the show. And so I've had to learn to do that. In particular, it's fascinating, right? With immersive, even more so. So, which is what I do. So I've had to learn how to continue to let go of that sense of immense over indexing on responsibility.
So you've broken the seal on the word immersive. So let's go in there for a little bit. I brought up Orange Lemonade at Canary because while it wasn't an immersive piece, there were elements that I was kind of seeing then that I can make that like the trajectory from then to now. Like I've only ever had a director like personally walk me and personally walk almost every single audience member to a seat, as it was a considered thought of like, and I realized as I'm sitting there, like, well, this seat isn't any different than that seat over there. But there was something about, well, maybe it was, but there was something about the, it was a considered thought. It was very considered, and I've only ever seen R.A. Minushkin kind of do a similar thing, so you're in very good company. But that thought of like, well, it matters to her, so now it matters to me. And you were doing this, and you were interested in immersive theater before immersive became this thing. Like you were on the forefront, you're on the cusp of it, on the pushing it along. So can you tell us the journey into immersive and like how you've gotten from there to here, and when did the quote unquote theater part kind of go on the wayside or not become as much?
Yeah. So I don't know how much of this is helpful to tell history wise. So I'll say, I've said this before, right? I've been doing immersive before we had the words for it, but that's because I think as artists, we end up having an obsession that we continue to be going at over and over and over again. And I don't think I realized how unique the obsession I had with the audience was. I have an obsession with the audience. I have an obsession with the relationship between the audience and a piece of work.
Same.
And I don't have an obsession with the audience in that I want to fuck with them. I don't have an obsession with the audience in that I want to test them. I am interested in relationally, how do I show up to something and I matter? And how do I matter without having, interestingly, responsibility? So like, how can I matter even if I sit in the back? How can I matter even when I'm quiet? How can I matter in whatever way I need to show up? How do I matter? And to me, that's not someone telling me I matter. It's not someone asking me to do something. It is a dramaturgy that now, when I look back, I've always been exploring all the ways to include audience in the dramaturgy of the work that I'm doing. And so now I talk about, I think I now have a lot more words of the craft and the technique that I've been building over these years. But if I go all the way back to Uma, I was really considering like, okay, the audience it didn't feel particularly like experimental to me that I was like, the audience is here. Like, let's just tell the truth. Like, what is, the Brian Kulick of like, what is it really? Well, what it is really is there's a bunch of people sitting here. And they're going to laugh at the same time. They're going to breathe together. They're going to become a group. And we're pretending that they aren't here. And that feels harder to me than understanding that they are. Like, it felt like harder work to pretend they weren't there. Now, at the same time, I think the beauty of that for me is like, I am actually a very awkward, shy person. Like, that's the truth. So like, I don't want everyone to look at me. When someone comes walking up to me in the audience with no preparation, I truly want to die. I curl up in a ball. I get very concerned and nervous, which is really a hard thing to have as an immersive expert who travels around the world and sees people immersive work and they come and immerse at me. And I'm like, gugh, I'm just being super polite. But I started to realize that all of these are actual cultural, we're building culture. What does it mean for people to belong just because they exist? What does it mean for people to belong even if they are more introverted? What does it mean for people to belong? And if I ask them a question and I don't expect an answer, that's on me, right? So like, I also would go see work where like the show would literally look to the audience and ask a question, and then people will be mad when the audience would say words. And I'm like, you turned on the lights, you looked them in the eye, and you asked them a question. The rules have now changed. And so all throughout my progression going from Uma forward, it's been, and for me, it started to be, what is this relationship with audience? How do they fit into narrative? Not just they're here because they're here. How do I not feel entitled to an audience? How do I feel that I am developing a relationship with audience? And so that work early on, whether I had words for it or not, or the way that I was doing that, turned into a lot of different crafts and tools depending upon the story world we were in with audience, that then turned into how I've taken paths down designing for fandom and designing for major IP. And because I'm thinking about the audience as a part of the world and them not as a monolith, but as almost like, the citizens of a country. And that also leads into kind of my social, justice belief system that like when we create a theatrical world, we have an opportunity to create the culture we want to see in the world. And that meant like, how do we practice how do we create spaces for disagreement? How do we create all those things? And so, yeah, I did not have words for what I was trying, but I was trying it. And I've always been really fortunate to have incredible collaborators. And at UMA, which was my theater company in Chicago for 7 years, like this is still my, in a lot of ways, one of my artistic families. I go back there. I'm going back there in a week to Chicago because it's a special place in my heart. And I'm going to actually see Theater of the Mind, which is David Byrne's show that I've seen before. But is happening at the Goodman. Charlie Miller is working on it and is a colleague of mine. And I'm just, and I go back to Chicago and there is it was an artistic home where I definitely needed to leave at a certain point, was ready to leave. But I was starting then with some incredible designers. There's a designer, Brian Sidney Bembridge, who was my collaborator. He's an incredible scenic and lighting designer. And we did almost all of my shows at UMA together. He is just an incredible designer. And I tend to like people in the room who are going to challenge me on whatever. Like, challenge me on design, challenge me on staging, challenge me on whatever it is. And some of those productions, like we cast Audrey Francis, now the artistic director of Steppenwolf. I was one of the first people to cast her in Chicago, and she was in our shows. Like, I look back to those collaborators, and we were really experimenting with what I would now call environmental theater as opposed to immersive theater. I try to use different words, and I would say the audience was within the environment. They did, and they mattered, but we weren't. They weren't, and also sometimes the way they entered the space was an intention for them to physically follow the path of the narrative. But it was environmental for sure.
So how do you then, I'm sure you have a very good definition. How do you define the difference between immersive, environmental, site responsive, site specific? Like you're this is your work now. Like this is your
this is what I do
to day. So
I mean, look, here's the way I look at it. My words now, the words I use for what I do now is I have created a craft I call immersive involvement. So I think there are many, I've been around this field enough and in how we, and by this field, like the field includes escape rooms, the field includes theme parks, the field includes immersive spaces, the field includes retail, the field includes immersive theater, the field includes and I've been in all of those rooms, right? And so we have a lot of different words for what we do. And one of the things that I feel strongly about, having come up at a period of time where I was also speaking in transmedia conferences, which there was a huge movement of that. And transmedia kind of fell apart because everyone was fighting about the word. And I was like, okay, we cannot. And there's a friend of mine, Jay Bushman, who said, he's yelled out loud at one of the first immersive design conferences. So nerdy. Not him, us being at these immersive conferences. I remember him yelling out, I think of it, I tell him this all the time, him yelling out, like, we cannot let the word immersive go the way of transmedia, which is like, we can't fight about it to make it, like, to try to be right. And so, and also, like, people get so frustrated now, like, you can watch a commercial and it tells you the toilet is immersive, right? And like, this car is so immersive, this podcast is so immersive. What I like to do is say, okay, that word to me, and it being used on everything right now, what I think it denotes culturally is people's desire to feel presence. I think that people want to feel present in their lives and they don't know how.
Amen.
They want to feel alive.
Yeah.
And I don't think that technology is the problem. I don't think anything is the problem. I think it is a cultural moment we are in. I don't like to look at the demon of it. It is where we are, right? So what I think then is, for me, my particular craft is what I call immersive involvement, which is I am interested in leveraging immersive tools to involve an audience with the story, with each other, and in their own lives. That's what I'm making, right? Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't get hired by a client to make something and I'm like, okay, what you really want. And so I spend most of my time working with when I work with a client or a colleague or a partner or a piece of IP, really drilling in when they say immersive, what do they mean?
Yeah.
And what I'm really asking is, what is the relationship they want to develop with their audience? And once I can figure out that, then I'm like, okay, then we should use this bucket of tools. But you don't really care about that bucket of tools, right? And where I'm fortunate in my career because of my curiosity and good fortune of being in a lot of different rooms is I've worked in this space having to use a million different languages, literally, like internationally different languages, and everything from nonprofits to big Mickey Mouse ears, right? Like, and small, scrappy, site-specific on a subway, and then, like, site-specific, like, through a massive federal park, right? Like, there, and the partners you have in all of that require you to find different words to develop these relationships. And so I think the words immersive becomes the path. Like, I think it's the gateway drug to what is it you really want.
Right.
Like, that's what I think. I'm like, I'm not going to resent it. I'm not going to, but like, what do you really want? And yeah.
When can you recognize like the tipping point for you? Like when it was like there was something that like shifted everything for you and you've just kind of been on a runaway train ever since, kind of. Is there something that sticks out as like, oh yeah, that piece right there really opened the door fully to me? No, not at all.
So I did this
again. I'm kind of asking just because like we talked about the moment of like when you stop making theater that has immersive experiences inside of it, and then when you're just making, not just, I shouldn't even say that, because you're making these massive things that are no longer about a play as a centralizing event.
I guess I would disagree in that I'm always creating a play.
Yeah, sure.
The plays that I make now have 6,000 pages of script and tracked through spreadsheets and pluralistic storytelling. So I would say that what I do now, I call what I do being an immersive showrunner. I think it's much closer to creating TV shows than it is to creating theater, but it is live and physical, so there is a part of that. And to just say what I do now, because maybe it should be said, is like I have a part of my practice and my work where we are developing original IP that are immersive projects. That is me basically saying, look, location-based entertainment, which is basically immersive shows, is the largest growing entertainment sector in the world. It is where money is going. And what is happening is there is not enough content to fulfill the audience desire. People want experiences over things. This has been going on for a while, but they also want depth and they don't just want surface. So just before COVID, this was absolutely escalating, and you could go down a block in New York and every other storefront was a pop-up, experience this, experience that, the museum of this, museum of that. And even then we were nearing a tipping point culturally, which was people were going, like, all the marketing statistics were saying, like, these all feel the same. People aren't going to pay money for them. And not only that, it's not sticking. And so what makes something sticky is depth. What makes something sticky is dramaturgy. What makes something sticky is when I matter, right? And so I think that the dramaturgy of it for me is really important always. And I liken that back to, like, it's just very different dramaturgy than a play. So I still feel like I'm very deeply in a practice that actually has its roots in some like dramaturgy, but it is literally different dramaturgical structures. And the same ones don't work. And so what often happens in immersive is someone who makes movies or someone who makes plays or someone who makes marketing events or whatever it is they do, they may make that immersive experience with an audience the same way they've made these other things. And that's okay. But then they don't have all the tools of that particular dramaturgy and craft with the audience. And so where my nerdy brain has been is obsessive around that dramaturgy, which now matters when I'm making, something for 350 people to go to space or in a galaxy far, far away, or, we're right now making a project called Club Holmes, which is a multiverse of Sherlock Holmes with a jazz club, which every song the singer sings is a different mystery and you follow those. Or, completely different things like Fornicated, which when you asked what was the tipping point, so it was commissioned by American Repertory Theater in 2010 is when it happened. 2010, it's when I was there. So I went. We were a third year of Columbia. I was really fortunate in that, and through Anne, I was introduced to Punch Drunk, and I'd known about their work, but again, was such the magic moment of Sleep No More in Boston for me was not like, oh, this show is changing my life. It was actually, I will never forget the first day on site, and they showed me their chart, and I very quickly was like, oh, I get it. Okay, so we need to go up here and do this. And they literally, I will never forget Colin Nightingale and Stephen Dobby looking at me and being like, wait, you understand this? I was like, no, this is the way my brain works. This is what I've been doing. And so it was the first time I actually felt relief as a creative, because I'd always felt like people felt like my vision was too ambitious, but I didn't feel like an ambitious person. It just, to me, felt like story lived beyond one stage. And so when suddenly I was working with artists who had only lived outside of one stage, I felt actually at ease. And so I was working on Sleep No More. I became the staff director for the first American cast of Sleep No More and was really proud to bring Punch Drunk's work to life and figure out a dramaturgy to train new people. Like, that was kind of what I did. And I worked a lot with the designers and Felix Barrett, who's incredible, and Maxine Doyle, whose choreography is like just extraordinary. But I worked a lot with Stephen Dobby, who was the sound designer, still their sound designer, and a dear,
immensely important for those shows. Yeah.
And like one of my dear friends and colleagues. He actually worked on my thesis at Columbia. And you know, I just spoke the language. I like understood the language. But they you know, it was also a great moment having come out of grad school to realize that all immersive is not the same, because they didn't really care about story. That's not their interest. That's not a bad thing. That's not their creative interest. Their creative interest at the time, and I think it's continued to evolve in the last couple of years, definitely. But it you know, they came from kind of a music and DJ background, and so their interest was this like awe. They wanted people to feel a sense of awe together, is what I felt. And that's very specific and really cool, and requires particular tools, right? Again, going back to like, what are the tools for what this immersive is? And at the time, I was working on my thesis, which was Black Snow, which was an immersive musical that we were creating at Columbia. And then I was living in Boston half-time, and I was like seeing a lot of music, and I grew up a big fan of live music. And so I had this idea for a project. And when I was going and seeing live music in Boston, I was seeing all these people my age. So I was in my mid-30s then, mid to early 30s. So my age, who were holding their phone and at the show, and it felt to me similar to how I felt, which was like, okay, you know, I see myself. I was born in 79. Like, I'm too young to avoid the phone. Like, the phone will be a part of my life.
But you remember a time.
But I was in college without email. And therefore, I didn't form with this as a part of my being, but it is now about to become a primary part of my being. And how does it impact the way I relate to people? And most of the work I was seeing and most of the language in theater was like, the end of theater will come by these machines. And I was like, and my way of approaching any of those things is nothing is that. Like, the world, that has never gotten us anywhere. I instead was curious. I was like, well, what is the relationship between my phone, me standing in a rock concert, the live music? How is it changing me? And so I got together a bunch of playwrights. I asked them to write 7 scenes. I said 2 of the scenes need to be silent because they're happening while a band is playing. And I was like, and this has to be scenes of someone having a revelation during a rock concert, like their life changes. I was like, that's all I care about. And so we got back like, I think 300 pages of script, and we started pairing it into the thing that became what was originally called Fornicated from the Beatles, and then became a project called Fornicated that changed my relationship to how technology works in my work. And a colleague of mine who was a sound designer taught himself how to build a coding platform, Will Pickens. And this is back in the days where, like, you know, no AI. So we built a platform where so audience members would buy a ticket, and we would text with them. They would pick a fan, not the band, a fan they were following, which was a character we had written. And we were we were directing invisible performers on this platform to perform these characters. And, and we were testing and learning about like, okay, well, this texts every 4 seconds, but this character is going to text you back like 4 sentences, like 4 words once a week, right? And then we built all of these characters' worlds online in Facebook. We were just experimenting with like, who are we in this? And how, if we develop relationships with audience this way, will they show up to a live show differently? And it was game-changing. Like everything about it taught me so much. And it was definitely a turning point for me, because then what ended up happening, which was my belief or my thesis, was if you deal with, I'm picking up my phone now, if someone could see me, if you deal with, how we, if theater going back and art is reflecting back to us what it is to be human now, we all hold this thing in our hand. We are bots now. We have this as a part of our being. Even when we don't use it, it is a part of the way we relate. I am speaking to you through a platform right now that is digital. And to pretend that it is not a part of the way I am humaning requires me to shut things down that sometimes takes more work for our audience members. And so if I could create, much like I'm trying to take care of the audience, right, and develop that relationship, if I could develop a relationship with an audience where they understood we were going to deal with the thing in their hand, and slowly, because the story needed them to and us to, all of us to, we would put it away. I watched audience members put their phone away without me ever having to ask. And so this was also me experimenting with like the developing relationship with an audience, that we are, much like we develop a relationship on stage of a character, we have to develop the actions and relationship with an audience with the same care. If I saw an actor on stage who had just been told, walk from here to there, stand there, and then sit down, that would be bad staging. I would be like, that is an actor who has no direction. We do that to audiences all the time. And so for me, technology and all of these things just became additional tools. And that show was a real turning point for me. The ecstasy that I saw happen in the crowd during that show, I still have fans from that show from 9 years, 10, I guess now it's like 15 years ago. Like I met someone recently who was like, I've been following you since Fornicated. I was like, what? We did 6 shows of it. So yeah, so it opened up for me, I think, that craft, and also me figuring out it. We did it with a different band every night. It allowed me to do the thing I love, which was relate to new artists, but also start to think about what is the dramaturgy and immersive architecture that is needed to allow for life to happen.
How do you, so I'm going to get real nerdy for a second, because
Do it.
I will try and talk to you all day, every day about this, because this is where my interest is as well. How do you sell, and I don't like using this word, but how do you sell the idea when this seems like more work for people who are overworked? How do you get this idea across to people who are, I'm just talking like either theater owners, people that work in the theater, the very traditional way the theater has been made for thousands of years, and anybody that comes in to try to disrupt that and have more, how do you get them to buy in to do?
I don't always, right? And I
Yeah.
also think I opened my aperture. And I think the thing I would say is that rather than approaching it as like theaters don't want to change, as a systems brain, I think, well, the institution of theater and people holding on to their jobs is literally built for them to succeed at staying within budget and not disrupting their system. One could say the same thing of operations at Disney, right? Every place is built to sustain, and people have jobs and they have families and they want to go home and they want to do good at their job so they can go home and they can take care of their family and they can have the personal life they want to have. Like that is humanity in the US, at least, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think much like I would approach someone who's working at a national park and I go, look, this person's job is to tell me I cannot have people march through this field. That is their job. It is not their fault. It is not because they are coming for me. I do not deserve them to say yes, right? I approach it going, okay, what are your needs? Let me tell you what I'm trying to do, right? And what that meant for many, many years, and I'm learning the ramifications of this now, is like I learned to twist and adjust and fit within a lot of structures. And if you could see me now, I'm literally physically
You're
twisting and
twisting
adjusting.
yes, yes.
And that's what I did, right? So, but at the same time, what I was doing and imagining and the financial reality of being a creative has always been something I've grappled with. Like I had to figure out how I would financially take care of myself and how I wanted to, if I was going to be a leader, financially take care of others. And so, I think that also I I think I learned pretty quickly. It was heartbreaking, but I had a couple of heartbreaking breakups, I think, with theater. And it was less to say I hate theater. It was more for me to say this is not the whole world. I cannot be in a relationship in which this institution has become my whole world, because it's not. And in fact, I don't always feel like plays are made for me. And I go back to thinking how I felt when I went to grad school audition, where I was like, I'm not interesting enough for this. I'm not smart enough for this. And imagine how an audience feels when they go into something and we make something and like we're talking down to them,
Yeah.
or like their perception, like they're wrong, right? I was wrong, but like, so I think that for me, it's not like I'm so grateful to so much of what theater at its best is. And I am so aware of its limitations, and I choose not to blame the institutions for that. It's not their fault. I mean, and I know plenty of people in those institutions who are, we have co-producers in our current slate, like Proctor's Collaborative in Schenectady, New York, and the Arsht in Miami, and the DCPA in Denver, and Lit Immersive in Seattle. And I know I'm forgetting some places, but we have partners who are trying to solve this with us, but they're not our only partners, right? I'm not saying to them, it is your job to solve immersive for theater. I'm saying you're a part of that. And then also we're bringing in investors, and then also we're bringing in real estate, and then we're also bringing in other players, because it can't be on the institutions that are funded the least to make this big change. Mostly because, like, I don't have time. Like, I'm getting older while they're getting older, you know?
You alluded to, and I'd like to talk as comfortably as you want to talk about it, the accident. Because you talked about finances, you talked about being able to take care of others while also taking care of yourself. And this is something that obviously, we don't talk about. We don't talk about finances. We don't talk about insurance. We don't talk about health, it's verboten to talk about these things because everything is already so difficult. Why do we want to talk about other difficult things? But I'd really love to hear, I'd love for you to be able to share what you want to about that experience and how you managed to get out of that and what it has done long term
Yeah.
for you now. Yeah.
So 2012 was a crazy year. In 2012, I think I finished my thesis finally, my paper, because I'd been working coming out of grad school in 2010. Fornicated was supposed to was premiering again. We were doing another iteration of it. And a wall fell on me and crushed me to concrete. It was a 17-foot concrete and wood, not concrete, metal and wood wall that was structural for a set. And I won't go into how it happened, and because it's heartbreaking and not really where the story worth for here. But so the wall was coming towards me. It was at the Atlantic Theater, a stage 2, and an NYU production. And it was after the show had opened. And, it's funny because when people look at my resume, right, like I've been working, but the people who are very, very close to me, and I mean like even some people who were very close to me, like my best friend, it was a couple of years ago where we were having a conversation and she looked at me and she was like, you never told me. You weren't telling me what was happening, because I would basically take a job for 3 months, and then I would have a surgery, and I would be out for 4 months, and I wouldn't tell anyone. And I was living in Brooklyn, and I was just literally, there's a period of a good 4 to 5 years where I had about anywhere from 20 hours to 40 hours a week of doctor's appointments. So I had permanent brain damage, but it also damaged my nervous system on my whole right side. It broke in my palate and cut my face wide open, but also like damaged nerves that go up to my neck into my vision. So I couldn't read for 4 years, for longer than like 15 minutes. And you know this, but most people who know me know this. My house is just filled with books. Like that's what I live with. Like I walked into Brian Kulick's house and felt at home.
Heaven.
And at the time in Brooklyn, I lived above a used bookstore. And one of the things I would do at night is I would go downstairs, because it was open. When it was closed, I had access to it. And I would sit in the bookstore. Just sit in books, because it made me feel better. Yeah, it was everything that I had believed I was defined by kind of went out the door. I was used to relying on my brain. And again, I'm fortunate in that I was high functioning, and so I'm still very clearly very high functioning. But that required, for me to function, it required me, I experienced a lot of aphasia. So I had a couple of, which is when you can't put words together. So I would be in rehearsals directing, and I had a couple of designers who are my dear friends to this day who knew, and I would look at them and they would know if I was struggling with words, and they might step in. I was pretty good at covering it. I think I had a lot of fears about being a female leader and a female director, that any sort of frailty meant I couldn't get there. And yeah, I then worked my butt off to get my strength back and my brain back. And every time I had a surgery, it was kind of, I would go back steps. And I had incredible doctors. But like the kind of like poeticness of it, right, that one could tell the story of is that, so I had written my thesis on synesthetic symphonies. That's what my thesis was titled. And about 2 years into this wall, and I'm in, we're trying to find the right visual therapy, and why is the visual stuff not working, and whatever. I meet this guy who's a specialist, Dr. Alan Cohen. He's incredible. I think he might be retired now, but at CUNY. And he mostly works with veterans and football players. And he was like, look, you're having these episodes you're having synesthetic seizures, which basically means that your sensory functioning is shutting down, because your body, anytime there's any sort of pain, and your sensory functioning is now fundamentally different. It is the thing that was different than before the wall. And I looked at him and I remember weeping, because I had felt crazy. I'd felt like a crazy person, because I could code really well, and everyone, like, my face was, I could hide things and whatever. But it literally felt like I was a different person living in the world. I was a different human. And I didn't know how to explain that to anyone. And I kept trying to, and I just felt crazier. And he was like, no, this is why this is what veterans have, the football players have, because your body is reconnecting the synesthetic response. And so I would have times where I would have these seizures and blah, 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 blah. So literally this way that, like, I'd written my thesis. No one told me to write my thesis on synesthetic symphonies prior to this happening. This particular way that my brain worked was the thing that was impacted. And I think now, like, I do not think, and I hate the words, everything happens for a reason, because fuck that.
Yeah.
I think there's reason you get to make. If you can find reason and you can make reason out of these things that happen. And I think that there have been phases, and I think I still have to consider how I take care of myself very differently. But ultimately, what it required me to do is, I had always had an inclination and a thoughtfulness around different ways of processing experiences. But now, from day to day, the literal way I felt in the world was different. And so maybe it's what helps me design experiences for a variety of cognition. And I am I have been included in and a part of different disabled communities and considered am considered disabled, but also realize my privilege in the way I function. And yet also there have been phases where it was really hard. And so I'd always been adamant about how we took care of the people I work with and have really had to reckon with how much when you want to do that, you have to build those systems because they don't exist. Like, I cannot express enough how much time I spend with my business partners looking at contracts to figure out how we can create space where we're taking care of people and also take care of ourselves. And the systems of this country, let alone entertainment, across the board, are not built that way. And I don't even know that it's intentional. It's just anymore. It just is, right? And so when I've had to now, I think of it all the way to how we build our contracts, how we built this first slate we've built, which has a creative pool involved, how a shared creative pool for our creators. I mean, all those things, but it's still not enough. I never will feel like it's enough. And yeah, it's I think it was part of my also transition in realizing how much theaters could be there for me or for whomever.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the conversation I had with Perone where she was talking about how she has to negotiate into her contracts childcare
100%.
that isn't taken from her already small pay. And so her running the organization that she runs now, leading the organization that she runs now, of saying no, we have to make this happen for all. What does that mean that we can't have? Great, we don't get to have that because we get to have the person.
And you have to make those decisions, right? I mean, I think that's the hard part as a leader is I think I have definitely experienced the moments of it doesn't mean suddenly you have twice the money to do twice the things, right? So the structures aren't built that way. So you are always making choices. And it's one of the reasons, I have 3 business partners, all women, 2 of whom have families. And part of the reason in building the business that I have now the way I did and partnering with them was these are people who value being human. And okay, your kids are part of your life and you need the week off because this is what's happening. Okay, we still get shit done. And we still are the 3 of them are premiering as we speak, premiering a film at South by, right? I think it was an interesting time. I was teaching at the Playwrights Horizons later on at NYU, especially during the election 2016 and kind of Me Too leading up to that. And I had been very the way I'm talking about the wall now, that. I mean, I never talked to you guys about. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought it was a dirty secret. I thought I would, no one would want to work with me. I thought all of these horrible things. And I didn't think that because my own brain, I'd watched it happen. I mean, there are people who walked away from me during that time out of fear that it would be catching, that's kind of what, but that's humanity. It's some people can and some people can't. Right. And, but I watched these students I had and their incredible bravery. And I had come up in a time as a female director and I remember saying to them, I was sitting in a class and I can think of the students. And I remember saying, I just realized today how fast things are changing. I came up in a time where I never thought that I could ever acknowledge that I always thought I was going to have to train young female directors to play in a boys club. I came up in Chicago, right? I thought that was going to be not you should never take abuse, but you got to get yourself out of that situation. All those ways I'd been formed. And similarly, to hide any frailty. Don't let them see it, right? And I was sitting there with them and I said, I'm the first person here to say to you, like, own that vulnerability and own those needs. And I realize I'm not doing that myself. I said, you are, it's why when teaching is good, it's really good. Of like, I'm realizing I didn't think that was for me. And that it has ultimately made me a better artist and a better leader. But it was a very scary thing. It has only happened in phases that I started to share it, you know?
Thank you for
Mhm.
being able to do that. I appreciate that. And I'm sure everybody else appreciates it as well, because the stigma of, God, I mean, I can't believe it, but I also can believe that, yeah, people don't know how to deal with it, so they just kind of bail.
But I think it's how people, I think people don't know how to deal with grief. And I think so much of the work I'm making or I make now is how do we live in discomfort? How do we live in disagreement? How do we live in joy? I think we're just as afraid of joy as we are of fear and of anger. Like, I know most people right now, the minute they feel joy, they are prepared for the floor to crash out, like,
That's me.
so
That's me.
how do that's why I think immersive is what we crave. We crave ways to practice behavior in a safe way and in a way that doesn't shine a spotlight on me and make me show people that. And so I now feel so deeply that this is my way, and I also found that, yeah, I think I don't again, I think it's easy to blame, and I just and sure, I'm not perfect, like, there are plenty of people I've been angry at in my life and felt frustrated with for their small thinking, but, like, in this instance, I think most of the time people are doing the best they can, you know?
I have undergraduate directors in this program that
Mm,
I'm teaching at, and 8 are female identifying. And
mhm,
I'm so happy because, as is the case with this podcast of trying to find women directors and women of color directors, it is hard because it's still, even though the change is happening, and very gladly it's still a boys club. It's still a white man's club out there. So I mean, you have your own company. You formed your own company,
mhm.
and going in, and I don't know if you're pitching or if they're pitching to you, or like, what does it mean to be in these spaces? I'm just thinking of my students, and thinking like, God, they need to come and, like, you know, meet you and talk with you.
Well, I first should say, right, like, I don't I function in a lot of different rooms. I have benefited from being the special guest star in a lot of rooms. I'm like the special immersive guest star. And that being said, I think that I have started to realize at the age I am at the rooms I want to be in, and I am more selective about where I want to put my energy. And I think there is, if I think of the last 15 years, the last 20 years of being a working creative or working creative producer.
Creative. You're creative.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I am. Like,
Yeah.
I know I literally am. I get hired for it. This is what I do, right? We can talk, maybe it's artist is the tricky word for me, but I think that it's a complicated, I also find generationally, like, it is a whole complicated thing because I run a company that is for female leaders. We're Black, brown, female owned company, are very adamant around where and how money moves to women, and in particular women of color or non-binary people and non-binary people of color. And so, I think one of the things that I will say is that I do think that it is not easier, but there's more of it. And I don't live in a primarily theater context, right? And so I think that I live in a lot of different contexts, and that's neither good nor bad. It just is.
Mhm.
I work with a lot of men, I work with a lot of women, I work with non-binary, I work with a lot of different people. The beauty of immersive, the way I create it, or narrative immersive, is it's
Yeah.
pluralistic storytelling,
Yeah.
which means there's not a hierarchy of storytelling, which means that there are multiple stories happening simultaneously. And that means that there is more abundance of narrative. And one would argue that that kind of non-hierarchical storytelling structures have tended to be more feminine storytelling tools. Yeah. But that doesn't mean, but then like, I'll say like that work and how it impacted building Star Wars work was incredibly empowering to realize the strength of that and to realize, and that team was primarily led by women. Like my incredible leadership. Yes, Scott Trowbridge was a leader, but Sarah Thatcher, Anne Morrow Johnson, Anisha Deshmani, like these women were leading that project for years. Wendy McClellan Anderson before I was on it and continued. Oh, yeah. Like that was a women-led project. But Disney, of course, is, it was Disney and also, but like I was fortunate to come on at the end and carry a football to the end line. And the teams that built that, it's just so expansive and some of the best experiences of my life. But yeah, that was led by women. And I think that interestingly or uninterestingly, there's a lot of women leading incredibly great work in some of these larger spaces who are more comfortable with the positions that they're not always going to get credit. And so I think the thing that is happening still is men are sometimes more comfortable getting credit. That's not a negative it's just structurally that's happened more often.
Why you have a problem saying you're an artist?
Maybe that's part of it. But I think part of it is just I just felt so normal compared to like all these crazy, brilliant people I know,
Waking up every morning and feeling an artist. I'm just going to put on my
I know it's dumb
beret.
and I know it's not actually true, but like I think of these incredible artists I know and I think I'm a facilitator and I definitely have vision of the work I create. Like I'm well aware. But I do think and I think it's generational. I think there's something around like I look like Paula Mendoza is this activist artist I know. I just look at her and I'm like, she just like is an artist. Issa Davis, like they are artists at their core. Like I adore them. I love them. I think they're brilliant. I look at what they do and obviously they're creative producers. Like they make work. But and so it's taken me a long time to figure out how to respect that in myself, how to honor that. Probably will keep working on that,
I'm still waiting on the Death of a Salesman with the 4 different families in a house. So
no, 4 houses. You need 4 houses.
Yeah.
You got to go between the houses. Look, when we were in grad school, I was cooking up all sorts of things and they were ambitious things. And I've made things of that scale now.
Yeah.
And like, there's going to be a big Death of a Salesman. It's just going to happen on Broadway. Not with me. It's happening right now.
Well, the anniversary will be coming up in 15, 20 years. So there we go.
Yeah, what we're getting to do, what's been really interesting right now in my work is there's the original work we're doing and then then another part of my practice is I get hired by like major IP to build experiences for their world, which is really cool. Like, whole narrative worlds and then go, okay, what is the experience that is going to be fully narrative, not just like themed and not just a pop-up, but like a real genuine space for humaning. And then also I'm starting to have opportunities to revisit theater and look at which plays or musicals I think have the opportunity for the dramaturgy of an audience and basically pitch and say, hey, I this is the production of this I could see that could still honor what this play is. I'm not trying to change the play, but also narratively, I can see how the audience matters. And here's how we could do this. And so I've definitely right now been revisiting, it's not Death of a Salesman, but revisiting some of those titles that like I felt like, it's just funny, right? Like a decade ago, I was trying to have some of those conversations and theaters and theater makers weren't ready. And now they are. And, and I think that I been as invested in the craft of immersive dramaturgy as some of these incredible experts are in the craft of musical dramaturgy or play dramaturgy. So like I can really speak to what a partnership looks like as we start to make that work. But it's been interesting to like be back in some of those conversations that are more traditionally theater again and remember those structures that I just haven't been around as much.
And they haven't necessarily changed either.
They haven't, but they also have. The parts that have are like if 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I tried to have a conversation with a major licensor of plays about what I was trying to do. I don't care how much cred I have. They would have been like, nope, you're going to break it.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah.
And that's not because of them. Again, it's not a fault thing. It's because a lot of creatives have broken plays. They've been like, well, I don't care about the dramaturgy. I'm just going to like put it on a spaceship. And it's like, well, that's not the point.
Right.
That's not immersive, right?
Yeah.
That's just what you want to do. And that's okay, but that's not this. And so I think that they are ready for that conversation. Is really special. And we have partners now. You know, I have some colleagues now who like have been in theater while I haven't as much and have been living in like the spaces in between, who are helping to translate that and helping to work with us to translate that. And there are, you know, things like Masquerade, which is running right now, which is I call it like an incredible gateway drug for people to really see a step forward in the way traditional theatrical works can start to live in the world.
So when are you writing your book?
Well, do you know this story, which is that I have 300 pages of a book
I bet you do.
and I had written it just before the wall. And then I'd started writing it just before the wall happened. And then then I dictated, because I couldn't read or write, I dictated chapters to someone and they wrote them. And then I put them in a vault and I just, because of the trauma of all of it, just couldn't look back at it. And so I've taken it out multiple times to like revisit it. And the problem is like my thinking just keeps evolving. It's not like that stuff doesn't matter anymore. I even went on a fellowship to Brazil, the Sacatar fellowship, to like work on it. And then I got there and it was 2016. And all I was doing instead was like writing briefs on stories for culture change. You know, it was like a much more important urgency. So I have it. I think my goal is right now, my time, the gift we have just earned is, in 2016, I got a small fund from an organization called Pop Culture Collaborative, where I was like, hey, this immersive industry is an actual entertainment industry. And it's about to bring in pump billions of dollars. And what if, rather than it being led by the same people who lead in entertainment, it could be led by women, people of color, differently. Like, how do we do that? How do we get ahead on the business side of it as creatives? And so did a bunch of research and built out business models and learned about business modeling and pro formas and all that stuff. Not because I was like, now I want to do this, but I think business is not limiting. It's generative if you look at it as a creative. And I was like, we do this all the time. We say you have a stage and it's this size and you need to make it and you get 5 performers and that's the limitation. Well, why wouldn't we then start making a project and understand some of the financial limitations or the structures or what the best way to do that is? So what I learned in doing all the research was that the way to crack open this field, if we were launching a new field, was we needed to raise money around a slate as opposed to one project. And as I started to do research, when you look at the film industry when it launched, or even plays, like a playwright would get kind of commissioned or taken under by a theater, and many projects, among other things, like a season at a theater in a way is a slate. All this way of thinking where organizations realized if we don't every time have to like capitalize one project and make it everything, then more of the work can get forward. And that we hadn't done that in immersive. So I put this proposal together, and back in 2017, like took myself and started getting introduced to investors and going around, and everyone was like, this is great. You're too early. And I was like, I'm so tired of hearing that, like, okay. And then when we didn't talk about it here, but I moved out to LA. I had run my own studio in New York, and I moved out to LA I got kind of, myself and my staff, we were acquired to launch an entertainment studio out here in 2019. And then by June 2020, for a variety of reasons we all understand, it had shuttered. And I did some work out here, and then literally got a phone call of like, hey, can you be in Orlando in 3 weeks? And I was fortunate that that team invited me to be a part of making a galaxy far, far away. And after that, when I knew I was doing work for Disney and consulting for them in Imagineering, which was never where I thought it would be. Like, I'd never, not in a negative way, I'd never worked in theme parks. Incredible. And so I was consulting, I was a creative consultant in Imagineering, that word creative again. And I knew I was going to leave. When I started to talk to my now business partners, I was like, look, I can build a client-facing business again. I didn't have that, but like, we could do that part. But like, that being a primary thing is not going to actually move the field forward or move the needle forward. What's going to move the needle forward is a slate of projects. And even then, like, it was such a different experience of having these incredibly supportive business partners, all of who'd worked in like politics, TV, and film, being like, are you sure? And I was like, and here's why. And they were like, you are sure. And they weren't, and it was hard what I was saying we were going to try to do. I was like, we're not going to go just make one show. We're going to go pitch to people that we're going to come up with 6 shows, and we're going to make them financially viable, and we're going to vet them for business, and we're going to do all these things and make them creative. And they said yes. And so we, in our business partnership, myself and one of my business partners, Nicole Golofsky, we focus mostly on she runs both sides, but the media side and the immersive side with me. And we went out to raise money, and we have successfully closed, several $1 million around developing original IP for this slate. And it's been harder than I could have ever imagined. But my job right now, this goes back to, is to build those projects. My job right now is to write them, to build the immersive dramaturgy, to lead the writers' rooms, which are creators' rooms is what we call them, like very much like a showrunner, to do the early development on a bunch of those projects. And not do all the operational and producing things. And once again, I'm in this moment of a gift I've earned, but that is my response that I need to take, and how to really invest in that. So the book will have to come after that.
Okay, fine. A question I always ask toward the end of the podcast, given to me by my wonderful student, Emma Hart, who cornered me in the hallway one day and dropped this bomb that has just been a great thing to think about ever since. She didn't realize how deep the question was. Can you think of a show, not that you've done, but that you've seen, that you were an audience member in, that changed the way that you thought of yourself or thought of yourself in theater? Meaning there was Michael before this performance, and then there was a Michael after this performance, and it changed something.
There are 2.
Fundamentally. Okay, great.
I prepped.
I knew it.
There are 2. And I don't think they changed how I think of myself in theater. I think I'll just say,
person,
for me,
it's fine.
the world of theater is like all the,
I know.
It's all the things. So one is a project called Internal by Antoine Gunt, like this Belgian company, that I saw in 2009. I got a fellowship from the National Theatre of Scotland to go to Edinburgh and see all the immersive shows. It was the worst 2 weeks of my life. The worst.
Wow.
I was abused for 2 weeks. I was like thrown on pillow. It was like everything about immersive.
Just immersive. Oh, okay. Not that
were
Scotland was bad, just immersive theater.
No.
Okay.
The National Theatre of Scotland was amazing. I was such a huge fan. No, it was just being immersed at.
Sure.
Good lesson in that. But then this show, which I'm not going to go into, was like my first lesson in the most immense depth of craft in an experience where normally I would be deeply uncomfortable and angry. And I came out changed, and I've still thought about it to this day. So there's that. And that was my lesson in craft. When I describe it, it sounds, it's basically you get like asked out on a date, and it sounds like my worst nightmare. not the asking on a date part, but like that being in a show, but everything about it was so craftful and real.
Requires so much.
I know people who went through it who like ended their relationship. It was really, but the craft of it was so significant. So there's that. Then I saw there's a project, Albany Park Theater Project, and Third Rail collaborated on a project called Learning Curve. They have a show right now called Port of Entry that's also exceptional. But Learning Curve, I still remember, it's an immersive project that they did in a school with students, with high school students. And I still remember this scene in a bathroom, having done many scenes in bathrooms myself, truly. And there was a teenager and she was having a conversation with herself, but with me in the reflection of a mirror. And she drew on her face on the reflection of the mirror. And I learned everything about, I had felt one of my barriers with immersive was I often felt that there wasn't space to have catharsis because you're feeling so alert that everything that you're on the spot, that you're like, I can't let go enough to have catharsis. And I realized there were some behavioral things and just craft there that let me really feel that. And I was changed. And then the third one changed everything for me was Rise of the Resistance is an attraction in Galaxy's Edge. And I had been brought down to Orlando to work on Starcruiser. I was like, hadn't watched all of the Star Wars. And I was like in boot camp, right? I'm like watching all of Star Wars and I'm like, whatever. And they take us for 3 days of like, okay, we're going to go through the parks and they're like throwing all this at me. And we get on that attraction. I go on it anytime I can, like anytime I'm in the parks and I'm visiting friends and able to go. And it was story. It's theatrical. It's theater. Fundamentally, it is exceptional theater. And I was like, okay. Like, one can say I don't do theater anymore. I just am.
You absolutely do theater. You would.
Work in all different forms. There's revelation of space. There's like all the nerdy things we were taught. The tempo, the pacing, the everything about it. And it was extraordinary. And I was like, now I went on that attraction and I had been like boot camping Star Wars. And I was like, now I care about Star Wars, like after that journey. So yeah, and I think those changed me all in different phases. They're all craft and they're all like very different forms, you know?
Can I give you my definition of theater?
Yeah.
The live, in-person, human experience witnessed by others of phenomena that intentionally create temporary alternate realities.
I love that. I'm going to need you to write it down, though, because I didn't remember it. Do you want to know the definition of theater that I think she was 8-year-old niece, my cousin's daughter, I went to give a talk at her, like, kindergarten school, and she was like, it's the human performance of our mythologies. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, could you come teach my college students? Like, it was so, it is how we perform. She said something like, it's how we perform and affirm our mythologies.
Beautiful.
What? Yes. But I like yours.
No, but that's an academic one. That's a much better.
She was 8. Like,
well,
come on.
She got it right. But
no, but I think yours is right. I think yours is good. I'm into it.
You're still doing theater. You're a theater director. You're absolutely doing theater every day. But
I think that word creates boundaries for people. I stopped using that word. I hate that it does.
Yeah.
But there are words that create perception. Words mean things, just like immersive does. I mean, for many people, when I say immersive, they're like, please, no, thank you. Right? I think theater, unfortunately, that word has not stayed in the popular culture.
Yeah. It's not stayed relevant.
Became so hierarchical and so closed door and so limiting that there is such a perception that it is not for me.
Yeah.
I hate that that's true, but I don't not use it because I'm not proud of being a theater kid or coming up as a dancer in the theater and like all those things. Like that's not that. It's that I don't use it because I don't want people to be afraid. I want people to feel that the things that we're creating are for them. And if the word we're using makes them feel that limitation, I'm not sure that that's my cross to bear, that that's what I'm trying to solve. Like, I don't know that I can solve that for theater. I can make things theatrically. And so I don't say it out of shame. I don't say it out of but I do think we have to acknowledge when there are certain words that, for good reason, create bias. And that is, and that just happens to not be the landscape I sit in. And that word in my landscape has been limiting to audience members. I don't care actually about how people think about me. It's that if it limits, going back to my obsession with audience, if it limits people thinking that this work could be for them, then that's where I became curious about what words were doing that, you know?
But I don't think you're wrong. I think you're absolutely right in the term that, because when we say theater, people think, oh, I've got to dress up and go to the museum.
Or they think it can feel like homework, or they think it's not stories about them, or they think it's esoteric, or they think it's silly, but not silly with them. It's silly at them. Like all the things.
Yeah.
All the things that actually can be the great parts of theater.
Yeah.
And funny that those same people, what I learned is those same people, thousands upon thousands of them, go to theme parks and have so much fun when theater happens.
Yeah. They'll go and watch whatever is playing by whomever is playing, the basketball, the football, the soccer. They'll go to that and they'll paint their faces and they'll yell and scream and get angry at something, and then they'll go home and have had an amazing experience.
Because there was a permission, and now sports has its own limiting permissions, right? There's biases around that, but all of these have those limitations, certainly. So theme parks have their limitations, sports has their limitations, but there is a broader reach in which I would say in sports, there was an understanding that the fan matters. In theme parks, the guest matters. In theater,
you could be there or not be there.
Yeah, I think not for every artist, not for every organization, but when you look at the actual dramaturgy of how a play is written, very few plays, like Our Town, there are certain plays that played with that relationship with audience in a dramaturgical way.
Yeah.
We'll call it in the US theater, right? But there's a reason why internationally immersive is moving forward much faster, has moved forward much faster.
Yeah.
You know, I go speak in the London Experience Week in a couple of weeks at the World Experience Conference, and it's just a different level of conversation. Because the form, I think because you don't have to get past the fear around all these words in the same way.
I'm serious. I could talk to you all day about this, and I do want to talk to you about this a lot more. So I know you have some names. You did your homework and knew what I was going to ask. So I'm going to ask now. It's not about the best work or the things but it's who deserves more attention. Who do you think, if you could just introduce some people to all of us today that we could all look into, who would those names be? And ultimately, I'll try to get them on the podcast.
I'm going to do two things. One, that you should know Lee Sashwitz. Her company was called Flora and Fauna. Now it's called the Storytelling Company, but she's an incredible leader in immersive projection work and artistry that I think is incredible, based out of Berlin, and just an incredible leader and artist. And so I think there's Lee. I also think, honestly, the people that when I wrote down the names, they're all Imagineers who people won't know about, or they were Imagineers. Some of them, one in particular, I mean, I've mentioned some of them. You know, Anne Morrow Johnson, who is now at Gensler, Sarah Thatcher, who's a creative director and is brilliant. Anisha Deshmani, who I got to partner with in creating so much of what Starcruiser was, but she was a leader in what that was. And then other creators, like Owen Knight is this incredible sound designer I got to work with. And then after Starcruiser creators, I got to work with Billy Allman, who's an Imagineer, who's just brilliant. He's I'm going to say it wrong, future biologist, something like brilliant.
Wow.
Just
Wow.
like, and then Joseph Lemoyne, who's a story writer. I think these are all people who, one of the extraordinary experiences of, I'm fortunate, again, like I've been the special guest star, which has its painful points and its really lovely points. And so many people, for good reason, Imagineering is a dream in their lives. I got the opportunity to work, when I showed up to do Starcruiser, I'd not worked with one person on that team before, not one. Suddenly I was working with hundreds upon hundreds of people very quickly. I should also mention 2 creators making really great immersive work in Orlando right now, Kieran O'Connor and Sage Starkey, who I worked with on Starcruiser and are now making their own work. They're directors you should be looking out for. I think it was an incredible experience, and also to realize these were all creatives who are brilliant. I mean, there are so many I can't even name, right? Like that I got to work with, and it was just the most exceptional experience. And hey, and when I look back now at other projects coming out of that place and the teams I know and watching what they do, it's just starting that they get to be a part of the story. And that's not part of the deal. You go inside Disney and you're a part of something larger than yourself. But they are visionaries. I mean, Anne Morrow and Sarah and Wendy McClellan-Anderson and Scott Trowbridge, Anisha, like, I get to go out and talk about this project I made, amongst other things. And they were the visionaries who, among so many others, who brought that to life and who carried that football for so long, And they're visionaries. And we, in all of the fields, will benefit because of them. We will benefit because our audiences were challenged to experience things in a different way because of these creatives. And so then now they approach all other work with a different experience. I think it's really special. So those are the people.
Well, you're a visionary as well. I'm so glad to have gotten you on here and speak with you for longer than what we'd planned on. I'm sorry. But I really appreciate it. And I'm serious. I do want to talk to you more and more and more about this because I'm embarking on this path as well. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam.
If this episode gave you any insight, inspiration, or even just made you smile, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts for more conversations like this. And if you're looking for guidance with a creative challenge or want to advance a dream of your own, we'd love to help. Visit boardofdirectors.world. The Board of Directors is a global constellation of theater directors dedicated to building community, sharing knowledge, and transforming the role of the director in the 21st century. We convene and curate a fellowship that fosters mentorship, artistic inquiry, and collective care, transcending borders and institutions and traditions. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.